Hatoful Boyfriend, or as many may know it, the bird dating simulator. For the decades since the series was released, Hatoful Boyfriend characters have been the subject of controversy throughout the small patch of the internet the games are known in. The largest of such discourses came in the form of 2014's Hitori Gate, otherwise known as a scandal involving the prominent character Hitori Uzune. This consisted of widespread hatred and malice directed towards one of the most controversial characters, with some fans even going so far as to contact the creator herself about how problematic he was. However, there is a lesser-known evil that some claim lurks behind the scenes in these two games, yet one that has earned that title semi-unjustly. No, it is neither the murderous school doctor nor Ryota's somewhat absent father. It is... oh my gosh, I have to pronounce his name. Well, I can say the first part. Well, let's just sound it out. Tohri Nishikikouji. I'm gonna have to look this up. No, it is neither the murderous school doctor nor Ryota's somewhat absent father. It is Tohri Nishikikouji, a former Hawk Party member also referred to as Mr. One-Man Samba and the self-proclaimed champion bad guy, who now resides as the editor of Golden Weekly. While one could make many arguments against the other Hawks, Tohri shines brightly as a beacon of light in comparison to his comrades. Thus, throughout the course of this video, I will unpack the qualities that redeem each of Tohri's unholy actions, while still making him an interesting enough character, and establish once and for all why he is the greatest character in all of Hatoful Boyfriend. However, before one can make a case for his goodness, one must first address his evils. Throughout his debut episode, this Birdman serves as a comedic villain who the heroes must fight. He takes advantage of Angel Higure, a high school student capable of producing hallucinogenic pheromones by using the boy's blood, along with the brainpower of countless innocent citizens, to power a giant laser. He intends on using this to destroy St. Pigia Nation so he may enact his revenge on Shu Iwamine, the school doctor and former colleague of his. In the end, his plan fails, but he severely compromises the health of a random teenager and kidnaps myriad others in the process with the intent to cause mass destruction to a place of learning. Thus, for a starting point, he does not make a very good case for himself. Moreover, in his route available with the first game's later releases, he plants numerous hidden cameras throughout the school with the intent to spy on Shu, yet also invading the privacy of the innocent infirmary staff members. He seems to constantly involve poor bystanders in his revenge plots, causing them paranoia and physical harm. This isn't even to mention his involvement in the Hawk Party, a group of birds focused on eliminating the human race by whatever means necessary. All of these things are played off in a joking manner, as the character himself is somewhat of a ridiculous one, but his crimes must still be addressed with seriousness. Despite his evils, however, Tohri Nishikikouji Despite his evil, however, Tohri Nishikikouji still prevails as a lovable member of the Hatoful cast. Additionally, as compared to his rival, his motivations are much less unsightly. Most of his actions can be filed under the need for attention or comedic revenge. Although his methodology can be quite extreme, his actions pale in comparison to the other Hawks. His ex-colleague Shu has committed multiple accounts of murder, kidnapping, inhumane experimentation without the subject's consent, manipulation, implied possible necrophilia, dismemberment, and various other forms of malpractice. Thus, when there is a lesser villain, one who is often played for laughs, who goes after this undeniably evil character, they appear much more morally sound in comparison. In addition, unlike Shu, he is able to win the friendship of the game's protagonist through a quote-unquote trendy afternoon with the two quote-unquote bitching about Dr. Iwamine, as the player character claims herself. She clearly sees Tohri as no great threat, as she is also able to dismantle each of his revenge plots and weapons without great effort. These all come together to paint the picture of a hilariously defeatable antagonist who poses no real danger in general. Ryuji Kawara, on the other hand, is portrayed as a kind-hearted, almost fatherly presence to both Tohri and Shu. During his time working for the Hawk Party, he makes a name for himself as one of the most competent and respected researchers in the entire laboratory. However, he buries himself so much in his work that he entirely neglects his duties as a husband and Ironically, father, up until his very death. Although he seems like a light-hearted and energetic character, the aftermath of his neglect still remains very present, with his son having to work various part-time jobs to stay afloat and live with the impact of barely knowing his father. In addition, the reason for his death was a disease he caught while on a business trip. Down to the very end, his work consumed his every waking moment. Perhaps if he had taken some time off instead, or made an effort to spend more time with his family, this condition could have been preventable. Although being subject to a fatal disease is nothing close to the deliberate acts of malice which Shu performs, the impacts of his actions still lay very heavily on another human being. Despite his enthusiastic personality, neglecting to properly care for one's child is a much heavier action than all of the misdemeanors Tohri commits. On top of establishing his moral superiority to both of the Hawks, when it comes down to it, Tohri can accomplish things for the greater good. In The Day the Night Slept After, the eclipse the main cast is watching together entrances them all into slumber. Its unique powers place each of its victims into a shared state of dreaming. This should have only lasted until the eclipse's end, but it's prolonged due to the clouds in the sky. Without being able to see the moon's light again, the state becomes more and more dangerous. A disconnect forms between their brains and their bodies. If this goes on any longer, the subject could be trapped dreaming forever. The Dove Party agents... How do you say his name?
Leon.
That's not how I was saying it. Okay. The Dove Party agents, Leon JB and Yuya Sakazaki, immediately start working to combat this possible effect by connecting one of their brainwaves with one of the victims in the hope of entering the dream. Tohri finds the pair in the middle of this process, and, desperate to be the star of the show, he decides he can use his latest invention to clear away the clouds in the sky. He is restrained by no moral compass. He neither does evil actions for the sake of evil, nor good actions for the sake of good, but rather any actions for the sake of receiving attention. This trait is what makes him such a compelling character. No moral restraints can bind him, as his wish is not to be the worst villain in all of history, but it is simply to take his revenge and look good while doing it. Tohri is capable of good, as long as the good actions he performs garners him the spotlight. This, among all of the other characteristics detailed prior, is what truly makes him a beautiful little bastard man. Tumblr user The Frogwild further supports this point, as seen in Figure 1. Their diagram on the anatomy of a bastard sets up 3 necessary characteristics: causing problems on purpose, engaging in trickery, and arrogance, hubris, and/or hypocrisy. Tohri certainly causes problems on purpose. His wild revenge schemes are proof enough of that. This also closely relates to engaging in trickery, which uses the same supporting evidence as the previous point. Finally, he most certainly exhibits great arrogance towards all of his marvelous creations, and even his very presence. Therefore, he certainly ticks off all of these determined boxes in order to be classified as a bastard. But why does any of that matter? Well, it means that Tohri falls in a blissful space between good and evil. He is capable of both, but lies on his own spectrum of chaos-causing without any definitive regard to morality. One may also connect this with the phenomenon of audiences connecting heavily with morally gray characters in mainstream media. One Huffington Post writer attributes this to the inherent relatability of their flaws. Because they do not always, quote-unquote, make the right choice in situations where a moral answer is obvious, it, quote-unquote, keeps them interesting. Therefore, Tohri is not quite evil enough to make him reprehensible, not quite good enough to make him boring, but just enough of an annoying loser to make him an interesting character. With this qualification in mind, how does his bastardness hold up to that of the rest of the cast? Setting aside the 2 Hawks, as Shu is too far past that level anyway, and Ryuji is not nearly enough of a hellraiser, there are few figures that get in that perfect middle spot the same way Tohri does. The game's protagonist, Hiyoko Tozaka, is a spunky, and at times violent, human teenager and hunter-gatherer, forging her own path in a post-apocalyptic bird society. Although she is far from the standard dating simulator protagonist with her strong muscles and desire to take over the world, she ultimately sides with goodness on most occasions. She always tries to do what she views as morally correct, like fighting against Tohri and his evil schemes, and it usually lines up with what the audience views as morally correct as well. Thus, Hiyoko does not fit the bill. The majority of her classmates face a similar fate. Ryota Kawara, her childhood friend and son of the aforementioned Ryuji Kawara, always does his best to support his bedridden mother and rarely acts out of any sort of selfishness. He is far too kind-hearted and reliable, ergo, one must also take him off the list. Oko-san, a bird-like bird who is a bird, and possesses very little complex thought besides his desire to find the one true pudding and worship his pudding god. Although strange and somewhat questionable behavior, it is not enough to warrant any sort of morally gray label. Angel Higure, the mangaka from the class over, spends most of his days detailing the world of his Dark Angel story, a tale that follows his interpretations of an existing fantasy-like dimension, with characters all mirroring his friends and acquaintances. He is literally neurodivergent in a minor, Your Honor, so he is also nixed from the list. Nageki Fujishiro inches slightly more towards the line than the previous characters due to his occasionally rude behavior, but still falls short. Under the false pretense that the doctors at St. Pigianations would help his weak immune system, he unknowingly becomes the carrier of a human-killing virus and must watch numerous humans fall to their knees and die before him. However, in an act of self-sacrifice for the greater good and the lives of these humans, he burns himself alive in the school's laboratory. Thus, despite his involvement in reprehensible deeds, he still comes out as a pillar of goodness. Yuya Sakazaki, an upperclassman to the previous characters, works as a secret dev party agent in the middle of the high school. In spite of the weaponry he occasionally uses, the party he works for is notorious for its goals of peace. Therefore, his motivations are too pure to step into middle ground territory. There is but one classmate who breaks out of this mold of kindness. Sakuya Labelle Shirogane, brother to Yuya Sakazaki, spends most of his time in the games acting pretentious and haughtily dismissing every other character as an unworthy commoner. He is the only outwardly rude and condescending character out of the teenage bunch and rarely exhibits any emotions towards others besides apathy and superiority. When he does deviate from these two emotions, however, it truly demolishes his image as a pretentious noble and turns his character into a much more sympathetic one. As the plot unfolds, the first game reveals that all of his behavior towards others stems from his father's commands, with the added reveal in its true ending that he himself is not actually of noble blood. His entire identity and sense of self-worth come crumbling down when he realizes how horrible and useless his treatment of others has been. Even though he originally appears to be a mean-spirited character with no possible justifications, Sakuya is merely a confused boy trying to follow in his father's footsteps. At first glance, he may come close to a morally gray character, but he is not nearly as destructive or purposefully annoying to even be considered on the same playing field. With all of these characters settled and crossed off the possible list, there remain only two possible contenders, Kazuaki Nanaki and Hitori Uzune. Their stories and motivations are deeply entwined together, as one cannot describe the narrative of one without the other. Hitori Uzune, brother to Nageki and cause of the previously referenced Hitori Gate, remains as possibly the most controversial figure among the entire fanbase. Beginning with Hitori, he was one of the members of the Hurtful House, the same orphanage that the character Nageki was from. One day, however, a group of humans come in and kill every member besides those two in an act of war violence. The pair stays together in their own new place until Nageki receives the previously described false offer from St. Pigianations to attend the school and be treated by their doctors. Eventually, Hitori gets suspicious of things and happens to witness the day Nageki burns himself alive in the basement. Swearing to take revenge on those who drove his adopted brother to such ends, Hitori takes advantage of a fellow quail he can use to further his goals. Kazuaki Nanaki isolated himself from the world for years prior to their meeting before finally feeling like he finds someone in Hitori who understands and cares for him. Still, even with this friendship, he constantly questions his place in the world and feels like a useless blister who would be better off dead. Since Hitori knows of the other's low self-esteem and declining mental health, he proposes the offer of both trying to die together. Although hesitant at first, Kazuaki decides he would like to go out with the one person who understands him and finally be rid of all his suffering, but Hitori leaves him to die alone and steals his identity. Kazuaki goes on to trap traveling souls in the afterlife with him, where everyone shares his consciousness and Hitori goes on to commit further atrocities for the sake of revenge. For these reasons, both of these characters serve as some type of antagonists in the games, although one is much more sympathetic and able to be forgiven than the other. Now, although Kazuaki directly fights Hiyoko and company when they happen upon him in their eclipse-induced dream, the game portrays him as a very sad character whose actions may be immoral, but with very understandable reasons. He was Hitori's victim, and merely lashing out from the hurt the other's actions caused. Because of this, he barely fits into any of the categories on this chart, besides his role of a villain of sorts. He does not cause problems on purpose, as he believes he is helping those who come to his kingdom, but he may qualify for trickery since he tries to manipulate the dreamers into staying with him. However, since he already does not fit the bill of the first category, he cannot reasonably be considered a bastard. Hitori undoubtedly fits into the hypocrisy category, as his atrocities paint him to be as gross as the very people he's trying to get revenge against. The other two categories are where things get trickier. As for engaging in trickery, it depends on one's definition of trickery. Hitori does deceive people through the means of his stolen identity, so, for the sake of fairness, it will be counted. As for causing problems on purpose, he sees everything he does as a means to a just end, so one could argue for either side. For example, when he pulls out a gun and shoots Dr. Iwamine, it does certainly cause a problem, bullet holes and the need for a wheelchair for the rest of the doctor's life, but to him, it represents his final act of revenge against those who killed Nageki. He only sees it as something he is fully within his rights to do. Thus, he cannot cause problems on purpose, even if they are problem-causing actions done deliberately, because he himself does not define them as problems. Moreover, there is one main thing every author should know while trying to create a compelling character. They need to have strong, action-inducing wants. Every interesting character should have a goal that spurs them to act, propelling the plot further. These motivations apply to essentially the whole main cast in their own different ways. Sakuya wants to play piano, Oko-san wants to meet God, Ryota wants to help his sickly mother and for Hiyoko to like him back, etc., etc. There are even some desires that have propelled the plot for years and years before the audience even comes into the story. These are the only ones that can compare to Tori's. For example, Hitori's revenge quest leads him to steal Kazuaki's identity and pose as a teacher at St. Pigeonations for years, gaining the trust of all those around him to later enact his plot. However, despite how much Hitori's goal takes over his entire being, the audience sees very little of this action. During his time at St. Pigeonations, the only real thing he does to further his revenge is in the true ending, as he finally shoots Shu and tries to cut Nageki's liver out of Ryota. But for the rest of the two games, he does almost nothing. He's just a regular math teacher. Shu is another character with a goal like this. After promising Ryuji he would grant one of Ryota's wishes on the man's deathbed, he sets up an elaborate scheme to eliminate the entire human race. Shu is the reason why both Hiyoko and Ryota are at the school, why Nageki had to die, why half of the student population disappears at random, and why Hiyoko's body parts are scattered around the school in the true ending. Yet, once again, most of the actions he commits are off-screen. We only learn information about his misdeeds through other people talking about them or through flashback sequences. With the exception of his route in the first game, most of his murders are things the audience only hears about rather than actually sees. However, this inaction does not apply to Tohri. Tohri has goals, and the only thing he does, for nearly 100% of the time he's on screen, is act on them. There is a reason why he is in every single scene he is, and it's always somehow related to his hatred of Shu. His goal is simple, to get revenge on the man who constantly surpassed him in every field while they worked together. Thus, I will go through every single scene Tohri appears in and connect its relation to this desire. He debuts in Holiday Star's second act, Fallen Chronicles Absolute Zero. Angel, Hiyoko, and Hitori are all at Comiket as Angel unsuccessfully tries to sell his manga. No one at all seems interested in it until a peculiar and flamboyant-looking bird shows up. He introduces himself as Tohri Nishikikouji, editor-in-chief at Golden Weekly magazine. Tohri shows up in this scene specifically because he knows of Angel's condition. Knowing the hallucinogenic pheromones can help him in his revenge plot. Although one could first believe that Tohri had a genuine interest in Angel's manga unrelated to his weird magic blood, he refers to Angel by name before the boy ever introduces himself. Therefore, Tohri clearly knew of him beforehand, and, as one can tell from his later actions, the reason must have been related to his scheme of destruction. He's mentioned offhandedly a few scenes after this first interaction. Hiyoko and Ryota spot Angel in the cafeteria, who looks exhausted and sickly. Hiyoko asks if Tohri's been saying mean things to the boy, who responds by saying this is simply the path he must take to get published. She exits, but leaves the others worried. Our protagonist soon encounters Angel again, passed out at the foot of a staircase. He says he needs blood, looking deathly pale, and immediately passes out. The only factor that's changed in the time all this has started is Angel's deal with his new editor. It's clear that Tohri is up to no good, so Hiyoko insists on soon revealing his plot. She decides to tell Angel during the next meeting about his manga. She bursts into their meeting room after observing the suspicious operating sign above the door, only to find the dastardly editor drawing blood from an unconscious Angel. Hiyoko attempts to attack him, but her fatal mistake comes at mispronouncing his name. Flooded with rage, Tohri blasts his new Nishikikouji masterpiece Nishikikouji masterpiece Nishikikouji. Flooded with rage, Tohri blasts his new Nishikikouji masterpiece X768, the optical ordnance Imaginal Ray. The office crumbles at its foundations as the power of the weapon wreaks havoc over the very room it was built in. Due to the undeniable success of his invention, he proudly begins monologuing about his evil scheme. Although his full reasons are currently unknown to the protagonist, the entire content of this scene is motivated by his hatred of Issa Soma. By getting this blood from Angel during their meetings, he can power his giant laser. His sole motivation obviously still guides him through this encounter. Tohri's next scene is a flashback. Here, one can finally learn why he's decided to go through with all this trouble. Back in their shared Hawk Party days, Shu, or as he was known back then, Issa Soma, always seemed to outshine Tohri. Tohri's proposals always used to get accepted, but once that fluffy heretic joined the team, his got rejected again and again in favor of the new recruits. Tohri couldn't take it anymore. After all, even his name is proof that he is special. He is meant to shine. He is meant to be the best, according to himself. So he leaves the Hawks without a second thought. This is the singular scene that is not completely propelled by his hatred. At the beginning, one sees Ryuji and Tohri chatting it up about how successful Tohri has been, nothing related to a certain partridge at all. However, the reason the audience sees this scene is so they can learn the reasons why he hates Shu so much, and why he would go through with this elaborate plot to destroy the school. Although he does not begin this scene by plotting Shu's downfall, it is merely because he has not yet met Shu. The instant Shu walks into Tohri's line of sight, his hatred begins. The greater reason for this flashback in the narrative is to demonstrate why Tohri has this compelling malice in the first place, so the few minutes he is seen without cursing the doctor's name serve a very real purpose. Even this scene does not tarnish the 100% of his screen time he spends somehow related to hating Shu. The final scene Tohri appears in during this chapter is the actual act of demolishing his school for revenge. There is no question about why he does this. Anyone can now obviously see it's to finally beat Shu at something. So those are all his most pivotal scenes, unquestionably motivated by his long-lasting revenge, since the chapter he debuts in is meant to be all about just that. But what happens when he is a mere background character? Does this still ring true? Of course the answer is yes. His final Holiday Star appearance comes, as mentioned in the morality section, during the fatal eclipse. However, what he does during the eclipse matters not for our purposes. The real question is why he was there. He comes to the school late at night to launch a surprise attack on Shu, foiled by the man's unconsciousness. Only then does he help the Doves' plan to wake everyone. Once again, the only reason he is in this scene is because of another wild scheme to outdo Shu. But an exception to his perfect revenge streak comes when one considers his actual last appearance in this game, one of the short mini-episodes after the main plot of Holiday Star. It takes place on Legumentine's, when all seems to be well at the Golden Weekly office until a large shipment of beans comes in. Legumentine's, a holiday based on Valentine's Day, and Setsuban, the Japanese bean-throwing ceremony, consists of girls giving beans to the boy they like. Tohri demands to know who ordered all these beans, and one of the editors explains that fans often like to send beans to their favorite manga characters. Furious that fictional characters are getting more beans than him, Tohri sees only one appropriate course of action: buy all the legumentine's beans he can get his hands on so no one can be happy on this holiday. He's basically grinching it up because nobody loves him. Hyoko finds him in the process of doing just this, and gets him to stop by gifting him some beans. Perhaps the first legumentine's beans anyone has ever given him in his life. Poor Tohri. Poor Tohri. Although this mini-story is fun, Tohri's revenge quest is nowhere to be seen in it. However, it is not a part of the main storyline. It's essentially the same as the drama CDs, and those are only played for laughs. They are not meant to advance character growth or goals. Therefore, because it is a mini-episode, he can't further any of his goals. He is not seen obsessing over Shu, because if he ended up advancing the plot in that episode, it would have to be a part of the main storyline, since not everyone plays those little episodes. The defense is rusty, but I rest my case. Next is his route in the first game. I already summarized this earlier, so I'll be quick. It begins when Hyoko finds hidden cameras planted around the school and near the infirmary. A few days later, when she comes back to the infirmary, a suspicious bird stands in front of her. She confronts this Tohri about his suspiciousness. His plumage and bluster initially win her over, but once she realizes he's the one who's been planting all the cameras, she reprimands him until he leaves. After this, the game presents you with two options: contacting Shu about all of the cameras, or contacting Tohri. Contacting Tohri is the only way to get the ending for this route, so Hyoko and Tohri meet up at Torimi Cafe. Tohri tells the tragic tale of his hatred for Shu, and how the young bird always outdid him in terms of research. Hyoko is not all that convinced that our pheasant's rivalry is justified, but she simply decides to nod along as he rants. Tohri next appears outside of the school, harboring his Nishikikouji masterpiece 632. Tohri next appears outside the school, harboring his Nishikikouji masterpiece number 632, the miniature optical weapon Dimension Bomber, in all caps. He gladly explains his evil scheme to completely eradicate his enemy with it, yet Hyoko is not having any of it. She smashes the weapon in one blow. Still, Tohri has not held on to his years-long revenge by being dissuaded by such failures, so he says he'll simply have to strangle Shu with his bare hands. Once more, Hyoko tries to stop his plot by now challenging him to a fist fight. The scene ends shortly, but one can assume that the man went home after this epic battle ended in a draw. Soon afterward, our protagonist decides to get him legumentine's beans. This is the sole scene he appears in during the route that does not focus on Shu for once. But one must remember that Hyoko is the one who invited him here to give him these beans, and he was only acting out of common courtesy to show up when invited somewhere. This does not disprove that his mind is only compelled by revenge. It just proves that he takes his commitment seriously. The final scene in which Tohri graces us with his presence, not counting the radio show in the second game, is another cafe visit with Hyoko. He tells her of his latest scheme, involving another one of his glorious inventions meant for murder. This time, she doesn't try to destroy it, but simply talks him down from the idea. She explains that she found out the other day that Shu doesn't even remember the name Tohri Nishikikouji, yet this only infuriates the pheasant further. However, after much stubborn refusal, he says he'll finally put his revenge on hold for Hyoko's sake. Even the supposedly happy ending of the route where Tohri stops his one-sided revenge doesn't actually include him stopping his revenge. He just pauses it. Tohri may never truly give up on his goal, and that is exactly what makes him a great character. He can only pause, but never stop. So yes, Tohri is better than all of the others character-wise, but what about the most important thing found in a good character? Is it their motivations, their acclaim, their humility? No. It is, of course, their fashion sense. And Tohri can work an outfit better than any of the other birds in this dystopian hellscape. Most of the students wear the same generic uniform, so it's hard to give them any fashion points at all. I mean, look at that thing. It is so incredibly boring. Personality-less, if you will. It's like if you put Ryota into cloth. But, just so we can evaluate things fairly, we will only look at outfits outside of the school uniform, unless it has been altered in some way like Angel or Sakuya's. Ryota often cross-dresses, but only as a job. He's seen working as a shrine maiden, maid at a maid cafe, cosplaying for a friend's Comiket booth. Yet, these are not what he wears in his day-to-day life, so setting aside those and his school outfit, we're left with that. A lot more average than you expect, considering his other outfits. I think that this is the most just a guy you can get. Where is the flair? Where is the personality? There is none. Ryota gets a B for boring. Oko-san gets a pass. He literally only wears the uniform or goes full naked because he is a bird. No style grade for Oko-san. Hyoko is only depicted as a slab of meat or that one scarecrow robot thing. As cool as Labor 9 is, it is also rather boring looking. The burlap sack does not work on anybody. She works it as well as she can, but Hyoko gets an I for I love you, but this is not it, sweetie. For as supposedly cool and suave and Yuya is, his outfits are rather bland. He has an unaltered school uniform and a rather forgettable shrine date outfit. I get that he's trying to go for the sleek undercover spy look, but he just looks like one of the guys from Supernatural. I've never seen Supernatural, but I did look up an image of the characters, and it looks kind of like what he's wearing here. They're just regular guys standing around. So, Yuya gets an M for Men in Black did it better. Sakuya is not much better, although he finally has an interesting uniform for once. His outfit is different, but it screams, "Get away from me, you dirty commoner." He dresses like he has daddy issues. Look at those knee-high boots. You can't tell if he's about to go horse riding or on his way to attend a public execution for a French peasant who stole a loaf of bread. Sakuya gets an F for French. Nageki sort of inches into that nice late academia area, but it still lacks imagination. His style is definitely better than a few of the others, but it's a Pinterest outfit with a few less steps. He walks a nice mid-ground between background character and Catholic schoolgirl. Even if there's slightly more creativity than the likes of Ryota, it's not by much. Nageki gets an E for, it's okay. Shu has been wearing the same lab coat for like 10 years. I refuse to believe he has ever washed any of his clothes. Get him out of my sight. He gets a T for the actual nerve to place this serial killer in front of my previously untarnished eyes. If Shu is a 2 out of 10 for hygiene though, Ryuji is a negative 100. Look at his disgusting lab coat. It's an eyesore to even look at. Also, he wears slippers to work, with socks underneath. But still, despite his improper lab safety and fashion disaster work attire, one must still give the man props for his confidence. Ryota may cross-dress just for work, but Ryuji just does it for plain fun. And, I do respect him for that. There are few middle-aged fathers who feel so comfortable in their own gender to play around with femininity like that, so it's nice to see a man like Ryuji doing so with such confidence. But I will not excuse those gross and mysterious stains on his lab coat, so Ryuji gets a P for please use a washing machine for once in your life. There's not much I can say about Kazuaki, either his true self or the image Hitori portrays of Kazuaki at St. Pigeonations. Even before all that happens, Kazuaki just dresses like a teacher. It's not a bad thing, it's just not really anything special. That there is a man who was always meant to be a literature teacher. Kazuaki gets a C+. Hitori is about the same. This is an average math teacher. You think you're so cool and quirky with your red scarf, huh? You think it makes your character design more interesting? Wrong. It does nothing. His shirt looks like Steve from Blue's Clues. There is nothing interesting happening here. Also, after he steals Kazuaki's identity, he wears a Snuggie to school. He gets a C-. Angel, however. Angel is different. Angel dresses like every edgy 8th grader wishes they could dress like. He has the confidence and the imagination. He finally breaks out of the mold of boringness. Unlike Sakuya's, Angel's boots do mesh with his outfit in his pseudo-goth style. He dresses like there's no tomorrow, and I respect him for that. But it lacks polish. He is young, and he doesn't have the experienced wardrobe of a true fashion-forward birdie. It's also pretty much the only outfit he has in that particular style, as Hyoko comments on during the shrine date. But there is one other who rises above them all. One bird with the vibrance, confidence, and extravagance to put them all to shame. Once again, the majestic Tohri conquers this competition just as he conquered the others. He commands attention just by his mere entrance into a room, not in any way from his personality necessarily, but the spectacle of his personal style. He's often depicted in the same flashy outfit, harboring a red double-breasted suit jacket with a red button-down and yellow tie underneath. He wears an obi around his waist with a green sash tied over it, the same fabric seen tied up in his hair. On top of the saturated reds, blues, and greens, the pheasant look is tied together by his fur cape that resembles their orange and black plumage near the head. Tohri usually sports a pair of white gloves. In fact, he's rarely seen in any sort of official art without them. His shoes appear to be regular Oxfords at first glance, but they're actually high heels. Not only does he rock the business attire, he walks in heels all day when he has absolutely no obligation to. I could never. I applaud him for that. And what would a bird be without his crest? The genus name of the golden pheasant comes from both Latin's pictus, meaning painted, and ancient Greek's chrysolophos, or with golden crest. Tohri's golden crest comes in the form of his aureate hair, dyed orange at the ends. His human form is an explosion of color all around, perfectly matching the vibrance of his bird counterpart. Moa herself draws Tohri in all kinds of outfits, showing his comfort in experimenting with gender presentation like Ryuji, and his total versatility. Who else in these games can go so easily from businessman to theater kid to crossdresser? Consequently, Tohri possesses by far the most essential aspect in any character analysis: a fantastic fashion sense. With that, it becomes clear that no bird stands to face the magnificence that is... How do you pronounce the name? Nishikikouji. 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 With that, it becomes clear that no bird stands to face the magnificence that is Tohri Nishikikouji. Although many have tried, none come close to his levels of beauty and power. He contains a perfect mixture of flamboyance, villainy, and comedy that all come together to form the greatest character in the entire series. His enemies will be struck down by the power of his weak and silly little revenge plots, and no one can stop him. Tohri is love. Tohri is life. And may we all recognize the light that burns the brightest among the birds from a 2010s dating sim. Thank you.
I'm a business guy, I'm a business guy with my business socks and my business tie and my business shirt and my business slacks. So you're ready for business? No, not quite yet. I get my business bonnet and a second pair of socks and my business pair and my business rocks and my business plate and my business cup. What business are you in? Shut the fuck up. With my business watch, I check the business hour. When I'm covered in mud, I take a business shower. At the business party, I take my business chance. In the center of the room, I do my business dance.
Business. 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 Did you get the memo? Business. Memo?